This episode, Concrete, the Basics. Been contemplating a concrete project? In this episode, the Handyman Pros discuss the basics of concrete, demystifying the big box store aisles. We'll also include some tips and tricks for product selection, application, and installation. Welcome to the Handyman Pros radio show, home improvement and maintenance tips from the pros. Thanks for listening to another edition of the Handyman Pros radio show, where our goal is to help you save time, money, and aggravation on your home maintenance and repair. This edition is entitled Concrete, the Basics. To help me explain, I'm here with my ever-cheerful co-host and old buddy, John. John, what has been going on this week in your world?
Hey, greetings, Larry. Hey, what's been going on this week is I did some things on a deck. Actually, and you can appreciate this as they had a big old like a built-in type of seat on the deck.
Oh yeah,
and it had these great big heavy. It was a great big heavy deck. Great big heavy type of seat. with these removable hatches in it. So you could store stuff in there. Well, this lady that I was working, I had a hard time picking these things up. To get in there. So she certainly couldn't. And she wanted part of her deck back and said, can you get rid of this thing? So, that's part of what I was doing, ripping that thing off and then, demoed that thing that, with the recip saw and all kinds of stuff, cutting through all those nails. And that's why I asked you about what kind of blades that you were using, and we can talk about this later. But to get some decent demo blades for the recip saw. But that thing
we like
took
demolition.
It apart.
We like demolition.
Yeah, we do, and it was great. So I had to fix where it wasn't where I took it apart and. Against the railing, but that's kind of what I was. That's kind of what I was doing. Now, how about you? What have you been doing?
Well, it's funny. So, folks, y'all know I've got a couple of rental properties. Well, we were wrapping up a remodel on a major one that was a pretty major job, and I ended up having to build a little stoop off the back. Well, in the process of building, because the deck was, speaking of decks, the deck was a total. Well, it was 1,000 pounds of trash that was completely rotten. Not that I know that, but I took it to the landfill and got rid of it, right? So anyway, the deck was completely thick. So we decided to build a stoop, and I had all these pavers, so I was going to build a paver. I had some leftover pavers from my house, actually, from doing the deck. And I decided I'd put a paver walk-in. Well, in that process, building the stairwell down from the little stoop, I had to pour a small concrete landing. Basically, it was about 2 feet wide and about 5 feet long. And I thought about it, and I was sitting there, and as I was thinking about doing it, and I did this job, and I'm like, I've done a lot of concrete over the years, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And I got thinking about it for this show that we have yet to really talk about concrete, John. So that's kind of the genesis of this show, is help to kind of do a couple of things. It's to help you understand what concrete is, what the differences between concrete and cement are, and what the uses are. And as I always say, concrete is liquid stone, right? I mean, it's just it's a wonderful material. It just has a couple of nuances about it. So we're going to talk about concrete, the basics, right? What do you think, John? Is that going to work?
Yeah, that's going to work, because I know a lot of people. We had a show on fasteners, and people were walking, saying, well, you walk down the aisle and wow, there's all kinds of different fasteners. Kind of the same thing, when I walk down the aisle, the concrete, like at one of the big box stores where all the cement and concrete is.
There's a lot of choices there. At least it seems that way,
there's a
right?
lot of choices. So, kind of let's kind of open that up and unpack that just a little bit, because as one of the little pieces of trivia that I came across, Larry, was that did you know that concrete is the second most consumed building product besides water?
Well, that's probably because they need water to make concrete.
But isn't that something? It is it's the second biggest building product. So, everybody's runs into it everywhere. That's you're looking at, you're doing things with it. So, why don't you go ahead and lead on? I know that you've done a lot of work for it. Probably a lot of our listeners out there have have used it, but there's all kinds of different types of it. But
yeah, there's a lot to
I
it.
think you can probably break it down to a number of different categories, I guess, in just some of the big box stores and normal stuff everybody's going to run into, right?
And I want to be clear. So long ago, I owned a vending company, and concrete ready mix was one of my kind of specialties. I had a lot of concrete ready mix factories. I'm not an expert in concrete by any means. One of these days, we're actually going to get a true expert on here to talk about concrete. But I did learn a lot by going. I talked to several managers in these plants and things, and this is where they actually make the trucks that, or not that they don't make the trucks, but they make concrete. They pour it in the trucks and they bring it to you. And so one thing I just want you, we're going to give you a general terms on concrete. There's about 4,000 to 5,000 different mixes of concrete. It's a really highly engineered product, and we're not going to get into all of that detail. I mean, they have different concretes for different applications, and there's a huge spectrum of concretes that are available. It's kind of one of those things that's under your feet every day, but you don't really pay attention to it, right? And and there's a million techniques. You can polish it. You can do there's a million things you can do with concrete. Mm-hmm. It's really, and like you say, it actually is. I would call concrete the basis, besides crushed rock, right? Because concrete has crushed rock in it. Besides crushed rock, it is the basis for modern building. Almost everything has concrete in it. Mm-hmm. Almost everything.
Sure does.
From your roads to foundations of your home to your patios. It's everywhere. You don't even realize it half the time where concrete is. Almost all commercial buildings, skyscrapers, and all are made of concrete. Anyway, with that said, that's a little bit of background on concrete. A little bit of my background on how I know what I know about concrete, which is, it's not expert status, but I know quite a bit just from talking to these guys. So the first thing that we want to start with in the basics of concrete is to understand the difference between concrete and cement. So that truck you see running down the road is not a cement truck, folks. It's a ready-mix concrete truck. Difference being cement, it's called Portland cement in 9 out of 10 times. There's Portland masonry or mortar mix cement. All three of those things are basically the glue, right? Cement that cements the whatever it is that you're putting in it together. In the case of concrete is really simple. It's 3 parts. It's Portland cement, water, and aggregate. And the aggregate is rocks and sand. So if you take rocks and sand, and rocks of different sizes, and again, we'll get a little bit into this, but we're not going to get carried away with it. Depending on the size of the rock you use and the type of sand you use, depends on the finish that you get, and also changes the strength and a few other things. Again, we're not going to get into a ultimate long discussion about it, but that's the basics of concrete. It's water, aggregates, and Portland cement, and that's it. That's concrete. Portland cement is cement. That's just what the binding agent. That's what just binds it together. Basically, glues it together. Right. So understand that when you walk down that aisle at one of the big box stores, you're basically going to see what, John? About 3 or maybe 4 kinds of actual concrete. That's all I've ever seen there.
Yeah, that's generally what I've seen. Like you pointed out, there's
there's tons of mortars,
but generally what they sell is probably 4 or 5 different types. There's some specific things that I'm sure you'll be talking about. Then there's the general concrete that we'd all use, and what you can give us why don't you give us a couple of examples of some things that where you would use just a regular concrete. Say somebody's out there setting, you talked to me earlier about some poles, mailbox, those kind of things.
Right. So I'm going to actually just take a step back, and we'll talk about basically in my opinion, what I see when I walk down the aisles there is I see basically 4 types. Usually it's 3. Occasionally it's 4 types of concrete that are in bags, right? So this is a pre-mixed mixture of cement, water, or not water, but cement and aggregates, and you add water to it, right? That's what a bag of, you take a bag of concrete and you add water to it, right? And that makes concrete. But basically I see 4 types. I see fast setting, right? It's called fast setting. It's usually in the kind of a red colored bag. Usually it just depends on the brand, but there's fast setting, there's high strength, there's general purpose, right? And then sometimes there's one that's called crack resistant. And we'll get into what the difference is. We'll talk about crack resistant resistance as a part of the conversation about additives and admixtures and things like that, which we'll get into in a little bit. But those are basically the 3 to 4 types of concrete bags, of actual concrete. The rest of it is mostly made for masons, or it's masonry stuff. It's for gluing rocks together. Or bricks, either way. It's for gluing a stone-based product together. Those are the cements. Those are the masonry cements, the mortar mix, Portland cement. There's a thing called topping mix, which topping mix is basically concrete with no rocks in it. It's just sand. So that's like if you're just if you want to just finish off a little bit. But I don't want to get into a lot of that either, because it can be relatively concrete. But let's just say we're going to talk about just like you're talking about, John. We're talking about building like the platforms that I built for my stairs, or setting posts, or some of these other things, and where these things work and what you're going to use them for. So general purpose concrete is really just what it says. It's general purpose. It's what you can use for almost anything. It is usually around 3,500 to 4,000 pounds of tensile strength when it's dry. Not that you need to know that, but that's pretty strong, right? Would you agree with that? That's really, really, really strong. High strength concrete generally is for if you're doing a foundation for a footer, or you're doing something, you're going to drive on it. If you're going to drive on it, I would buy the high strength stuff. If you're doing anything where you're going to run a piece of equipment over it, you're a real piece of equipment, something that weighs several thousand pounds, your car or a tractor or something that's heavy, you might want to use high strength. And that's generally a tensile strength of 5,000 pounds. Fast setting is usually used for someplace where you, as it says, fast setting, you need it to set up quickly. And that's going to be for something like, it can be for setting posts, or someplace where you've got something that you need to get it done quickly. You want to get it done quickly. By the way, the high strength, the fast setting, and then crack resistant concrete are all more expensive than general purpose. So if you don't need the speed, use general purpose. The difference in strength and stuff is not much. What changes the drying rates of concrete is additives. It's what they add into it. And I did mention crack resistant. So crack resistant concrete is basically general purpose concrete or high strength concrete with fibers. It's almost like fiberglass, but it's little shredded. It's usually shredded up fibers, and they mix that into the concrete. And if you think about it, if you take fibers and you put it into a glue mixture, how strong does it make it? It makes it really strong and very crack resistant. And we'll get into strengthening concrete via either fiber or steel in a minute too, right? So sometimes, depending if you're doing a really big pour, you've got a big area and you want to make it not crack resistant, you'll reinforce it with a thing called rebar, right? And if you don't know what rebar is, it's basically steel rods that are it's not the greatest steel in the world. It's kind of soft, but you can work with it and you can weld it together. You could put wire mesh in there in the concrete before you pour the concrete into it, and the concrete flows around it, and then it hardens it up and it makes it really super strong, and it makes it very less resistant to crack. But you can also do that with fibers. So that's that. Have I gone too fast, John? Is there any questions that you have?
No, not at all. And I would just add that, I guess when most people are going, when people are going to do these home projects and things like that, when I've ever used it, I've always just kind of bought the general concrete, the Quickcrete, whatever you want to call it.
Yep, there's a bunch of brands, bunch of different brands.
It's a bunch of different brands, and I will say that that has really served just about all my purposes well. And what Larry's talking about is some of these things can be very specific to very specific, for very specific jobs.
Right.
But most of us, that are going to build steps, right? That you just built, right?
Yep. Just
you used a general
purpose concrete. Yeah, this is just going to be for human traffic and even 4,000 tensile pounds. I mean, you can drive you can drive on general purpose concrete. Don't get me wrong, but I'm just saying, if I know I'm going to pour something on my driveway, I'm going to spend the extra. I don't know, it's like 50 cents or $1. I don't remember what it is, but it's not much. I'm going to spend that because I know I'm going to be driving on it. But for most uses, I use general purpose for almost everything. In fact, I can't think the last time I've used fast setting or high strength. Now, sometimes I use crack resistant, but that's usually if we're pouring something that I know has a potential for cracking. But that's pretty rare. And like I said before, if you're a real concrete professional, there's 4,000 to 5,000 different. I mean, they can make concrete do whatever you want it to do. It's pretty amazing stuff. Anyway, moving on. I wanted to talk a little bit about additives, right? So, John, you've seen concrete that's different colors, right?
Yeah, that's pretty popular, right? You know, they'll do a piece of a driveway, they'll imprint that concrete with something that looks like, you know, pavers.
Yep.
You know, and they'll either put an additive in there or they'll stain it, or they just make it make it a different color.
Yep.
And it actually looks like pavers.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you'll see this in you know, we've got these roundabout things, you know, in the traffic circles and things like that. That this is what they do, and it looks, you know, it's very decorative. It looks really nice.
Yeah, and so additives. There's a bunch of different. There's about 1 million additives, but the biggest one that most, we'll call it homeowners or DIY people would deal with, is a color additive. So if you want to color your concrete, at the time you're mixing it up, you can add a color additive. And it comes in a, you know, I'm going to say not the rainbow colors, but there's different colors and you can change the color. And you basically add it in, and it's just like taking a cake batter and adding food coloring. It makes it a color, right? So you can do it that way. There's other additives, and again, I don't want to have a huge, long conversation on it because there's so many additives that we could overwhelm you, but you can change the dry rates. You can change the strength to a degree. You can add fibers to change the crack resistance if you can't find the stuff that's pre-mixed in a bag. There's a whole lot of different. You can change the permeability. Like I say, it's a highly engineered product. But the biggest ones, like I say, are basically, you know, crack resistance, where you might add in something that you know, add some fiber in that changes the strength of it, and then color. Color is really the big one for most people, because you can color. It's pretty amazing how the color. It
is pretty amazing, and that is a big. That has been a big trend in pouring patios.
Yeah,
matter of fact,
very much. You know,
and sometimes it's like, wow, that's a really nice job. That's all concrete. Yeah. You know, it looks really nice. Let me just add one thing about additives, is that, you know, you have to be careful sometimes. if you add in additives that make it dry too fast, the concrete will never be right.
Yes. Correct.
And forevermore, it will never act good. It'll start to flake apart and things later on. But that's a whole different story.
Which is why we're not really having that conversation.
Yeah.
Just because we're talking in real general terms here. But color is generally pretty easy to do, and crack resistance is actually pretty easy to do. All right, so I mentioned it already, but I did want to talk about reinforcement again. So there's a couple of different ways to reinforce concrete, but it's a combination of steel and or fiber. If you're getting this really only applies if you're doing really big pours, like where you have structure. If you're going to drive on it, you might want to put some rebar in it or put some fiber in the concrete. It just depends on the base that you're pouring over and all this kind of thing. And again, I don't want to get into it, but you can make it really strong yourself. And so if you go down and you see these steel bars, you'll understand that when you go into the concrete department, there's rebar there, and there's rebar and wire mesh, and that's what it's for. You pour it through that, it bonds into it, makes it super strong. Any other questions just on the introduction to concrete, John?
No,
the basics.
No, I think that's, I think this is what you're going to see when you go down the aisles of the big box store of what all this is. You know, you're going to have a select few different types of concretes. You're going to have some of the options on the other side of the aisle, like the rebar and the mesh that Larry's talking about. So it really does depend upon what type of project that you're putting together. There's all kinds of different options for you to do it right with things like that mesh and the rebar.
Yeah, and I wanted to just mention, this is something I'm going to do this one of these days for my concrete products, but there's a trend right now, particularly in the DIY market, for people making concrete countertops. Have you seen this, John?
I have. I'm not that guy, though, I guess. I'm not a fan of that, but yeah.
Well, I mean, I just mentioned it because it just kind of came to me, and I was thinking about it when we were thinking about color. That a lot of the times, so people will make molds, and we'll get into the molds because we're getting into tools next anyway. So, but you make a mold for your concrete countertop, and they change the color by adding in the color additives. And then concrete too, folks, if you don't know this, you can really polish it and make it really shiny. Like it's like shiny. And there's been a trend. People are doing this and they're doing it on their own. I've looked at doing it, and I've got to tell you, for me, the amount of time it takes to pour a concrete countertop, I don't know that the juice is worth the squeeze, because I can buy granite for just about the same amount for the money versus time. I'm not sure I can't just do granite cheaper.
And folks, if you're going to do a concrete counter, or I've seen people do concrete seats inside their shower and things like that. Just understand that this stuff is pretty heavy.
We're getting that that's a safety tip, right?
You better have the support structure underneath your cabinets to support it. You just can't go throwing around a lot of weight on top of your kitchen structures,
right?
without knowing what you're doing.
Exactly. Well, that gets into thickness and all that kind of stuff too. One of the quick safety, we're going to go over a couple of safety tips, but one thing we do want to talk about, because we're getting into where we're going to talk about installation, right? And folks, if you're going to do concrete products, understand that this is a very physical job, right? So bags of concrete generally come in 60 or 80 pound bags, right? And you think, oh, it's only 20 pounds difference between the 60 and 80. Well, let me tell you, at the end of the day, you know it, my friend. You can tell if you've been doing 80s versus 60s.
And you send your buddy out, right?
Yeah, right.
To go get bags of concrete?
Yeah, I do that. That's what I do.
That.
Me.
Who do that, Larry? Okay. Yeah, thanks. So yeah, it is heavy.
I'm going to tell the backstory on that one. So John and I are on a job, and we're actually out doing the customer had a pool deck, and she had a diving board on there, and the other contractor comes in, and she asked the other contractor to take the diving board down. So what's he do? He takes his Sawzall and he cuts the diving board on the stainless steel tubes on the diving board off right flush with the concrete, except he didn't get it quite flush. There's a little bit of a hair edge sticking up out of this concrete, right? So John and I we both look at it and we go, like, people walk on this in bare feet. Like you can't have this sharp metal little section sticking up. So anyway, long story short, while Larry was pounding the stainless steel tubing down into the ground, John had to go buy concrete so that we could fill the holes and smooth them out and make it nice so you could walk on it without cutting your feet up. We couldn't, whatever. It's another deal. John, I did have a question for you. You're from Chicago. Isn't Chicago the land of concrete galoshes or concrete overshoes?
Yeah, concrete shoes.
Isn't that what? Concrete
isn't that, shoes, baby.
Are we going to find Jimmy Hoffa? I'm just kidding.
Probably not.
Probably. I heard he's part of the concrete and I-10 myself. But anyway, not that I know that. All right, so we're getting to installation. So what tools do you need if you're going to do a concrete job, right? Because we got to talk about the tools. Because that's what we talk about. So first thing you need is you're going to need, there's three things you really need. You need a mixing vessel. I use a wheelbarrow, and I also have a pan. It just depends on where I'm doing it. Now, I have done, when I'm doing bigger jobs, I've rented a mixer, like a little electric mixer. And it holds one 80-pound bag. It's beautiful. But if you're going to do a whole bunch, you might think about renting a mixer. But you definitely need at least a wheelbarrow or a pan. You're going to need a shovel and a hoe. You need that basically. And there's a concrete hoe that has holes in it and allows you to mix the concrete. It's helpful if you're, again, it just depends on how much you're going to do. But you can all mix it with a shovel. And by the way, back to my original statement, this is a pretty physical job, right? So mixing concrete, it's not that it's hard, it's just very physical. You are going to perspire a little bit when you do it. The other thing you need is a trowel of some sort. And you can use, there's multiple different things you can use as a trowel, but you need a metal trowel. You can also use a wood float. You can take a piece of 2x4 and use it as a float to kind of screed it off and make it smooth. And then you might need a broom as well if you want to put some texture on the top. And then you're going to need some sort of like forms to actually form up what you're going to do, unless you're burying it in the ground. So like the stairs that I built were above the ground a little bit. I had them about 2 inches above the ground. So I had some scrap wood actually from the old deck that I used. And this does not need to be grade A. In fact, I would suggest it's not grade A top quality wood. But you need some way to build an actual form, meaning the piece that you're trying to build, you're going to build it to whatever shape, and you're going to make walls basically that are going to hold the concrete in so that it doesn't gush all over the place. Now, again, if you're going into the ground and you want it flush to the ground, just dig a hole, right? You dig, if you're doing it square, you dig a square hole and you pour the concrete in there and you'll be fine. But concrete is, as I said, it's liquid stone. So if you try to pour it on the ground, it's going to blob out, and it's going to seep and it's going to leave a non-finished edge.
And and you'll see people, for everybody out there, and if you haven't worked with it before, you'll see some trucks and things like that going down the highway with these great big forms that are all filled with concrete and they're dirty and everything. And you can just keep using these forms over and over again.
Yeah. And like foundation guys and stuff use metal forms because their walls are always the same thickness and they actually, those are segmented, anyway, blah, blah, blah. They're segmented parts and they just reuse them over and over. And you can use metal if you have it. Most people use wood. That's just, for DIY, that's the easy. Yeah, I always have to. I always do. I don't think I've ever used metal. If I have, I don't remember it. But anyway, so you need that. So those are the tools that you need. You need some sort of a mixing vessel, some way to mix it, which is a shovel or a hoe. You need a trowel or something to finish off the top with. Maybe a broom. You're definitely going to need some kind of form, to hold it, unless you're doing it, built into the ground. And then you need your galoshes. No, you don't need your galoshes. That's if you're putting somebody into the ground. Actually, the lake. But anyway, never mind. So I guess the next step here is if you've got your project, and let's just say, so I was doing steps. So I built my forms out of wood, and what I did is they were going to be in the ground, and so I put them into the ground, but I made the steps level, right? So I had to build the form, and I wanted each step to be level, and I wanted it a certain distance apart, right? So that's all just a carpentry project, right? And if you can't do basic carpentry, this might not. But let's just talk about let's talk about my base that I put into the ground. So it was a rectangular shape. I took two 2x6s that were scrap that I had off the deck, and I took 2 long ones and 2 short ones, and I just put 4 screws into it to hold them together to make it square. To level it up, I put the level across both ways, right? You got to have it level both ways. And I just made sure in the dirt that it was level. And I actually packed dirt up underneath one side to, if it was off, just to level it up, because the concrete won't push through the bottom. It'll hold in the bottom. So I just built it up and I made it level. And it was at the level and the height that I wanted it above the ground, right? So all of this is just kind of, you can just do this with your hands, and get it right, get it to where it's level. Then you can pack it, and you just don't want it to move when you pour some things in. But that's building your and you can build whatever shape you want. So it's just all how you build it, right? So John, have you done any like interesting forms? Have you done any kind of built like anything other than just flat stuff in the ground?
Just some ramps coming out of a shed, coming down. If you kind of look on the side of it, it's like just a triangle on the side, and just like you said, it's an easy project, and you just screed it off with a 2x4 or whatever on the top. You make it level, and if you and you broom it, and it's sat like that for 25, 30 years, I guess. 30 years. Probably still there.
It's probably still there.
Or another. But I mean, it's not very, it's not hard. It's not rocket science. But it is. It's a lot of physical.
It's a lot of physical work.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So I mean, you can just form it up as any way that you want.
Yeah.
But I guess Larry, my question is that when people are doing this, let's say you're building that. You're building a little stairway, or not stairs, but the little patio there, the little step.
Yep.
You were telling me earlier about when you were setting fence posts, and this is something in our fencing show that we were talking about, and is that where you have a gate, those posts on both sides are cemented in. Isn't that what you said?
As a normal course of action, they are. Yes, general rule of thumb, they are almost all the time.
Yeah, so the gate stays nice and tight, and it doesn't wobble and anything else.
And mailbox posts as well are generally concreted in. Yeah.
So when you did that, when you set those poles, why don't you tell us how you did? You poured in the concrete dry, right? Is that
Yeah.
what you?
So when setting a post in the ground, right? This is a tip that I learned about 1,000,000 years ago when I worked for the fence company. But when you're setting a post in the ground, one of the hardest things is you want the post to be vertical, right, John?
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
so the way that you do this is you dig the post hole, right? And you get the post. You generally dig the post hole a little bit big, a little obviously larger than the post. But you're also, generally, when you're doing if you're doing a fence line, you also want it to be, in line with the rest of the fence. So you build it kind of big. You dig the hole kind of big, and you set the post in there. Is what you do. You just set your post in, and you take your level or levels, you depending on how you do it. But I use a long level on one side, and then I square it up on both sides. So I hit two sides if it's a square post to get it vertical. And when I get it vertical, then I take some concrete. I take a small amount of just dry concrete. I pour it in the bottom, and you use a big tamping bar, and you get that post where you want it, and then you tamp the concrete in dry around it, right? And that sets the post where you want it. And then I'll fill the rest of the hole up, and then tamp the concrete down around it. Now, the concrete's dry at this point. You say, well, Larry, you're just putting in dry concrete. And that's a correct statement. And it is a dry concrete. And you can use, this is one place where you can use fast setting concrete as well. You can mix your fast setting concrete wet, or you can do the dry method. I've always done the dry method because I like to get the posts perfect without having to support the post. If you're putting a post in and you're going to use wet concrete, you're going to have to take some 2x4s and you're going to have to set the post so that it's vertical, so it doesn't move at all when you pour the wet concrete in, because the post will move. Back
No,
and
it's
forth.
That's a good tip.
So
let me
you
go
pour it in
back.
and tamp it down and get it square, and then you can do one. Let me finish, John, because I wasn't quite done. You can there's two ways to do it. You can either pour a little bit of water on the top, and when I mean a little bit, I mean just enough to wet the top. That'll seep down into the concrete, or you can just let the groundwater naturally come into the concrete, and it'll come in and harden it up. And so you don't even really technically need to add water. I always add just a little bit of water. I'll add a couple of cups, I'll take the hose and just kind of fill up the top of it so that it's full. And then by the time I leave the job, every time I leave, the water's already gone. It'll suck down into that concrete. And then I know that it's going to be wet. And then the groundwater will finish the rest of it. So that's the way I set posts, and it works really, really well, by the way.
So let's say that somebody's out there and they want to put in their a new mailbox post, and they want to do this. And I strongly recommend you do that. Otherwise, it's your mailbox is forever going to wobble everywhere.
It is, and that's the reason to do
because
it.
it's open and closed, and it's pushed, and it's bumped, and it's this and that. And so if somebody's going to do that, and they want to put in a rapid set concrete or a fast set, how long does that usually take before that concrete really does start to set up?
So, okay, yeah. So we haven't touched on this, so that's a great question. So a couple of things. So concrete. Just talk general purpose concrete. So general purpose concrete will start to set up in about 4 to 5 hours. After about 24 hours, it's become technically hard, right? Mm-hmm. It's hard, but it's not cured. So you still can I'm going to say damage it. It would take a bit, but you don't want to drop a hammer on it. You don't want to drive on it. You don't want to put a lot of weight on it after 24 hours. After about 2 or 3 days, now it's hard enough that you don't have to worry about things other than really heavy things like vehicles. So you wouldn't want to drive on it in 2 or 3 days. You'd want to wait even longer than that. This is where they'll put in some of the admixtures or do like if you're doing a driveway and people are living there, lots of times they'll put an admixture in that'll cure that concrete a little faster so you can drive on it sooner. Because otherwise, concrete takes about 28 to 30 days to fully cure, just traditional general purpose concrete. Mm-hmm. And that's why, folks, if you're out there and you see them like build a bridge or some kind of heavy construction piece, particularly bridges. I've noticed it, John, because, there's never construction in Atlanta, right? Mm-hmm. So they build these, yeah, right, John laughs. And there's always construction. And anyway, but you always wonder why they have these things done and then nobody's working on them for what seems like a month. Well, that's because nobody's working on it for a month while the concrete cures. That's actually the reason why nobody does anything on that bridge for a month after they pour the concrete, is that concrete has to fully cure before they'll let anybody drive on it. So, and again, for most of what we're doing as homeowners, that really doesn't play. I mean, unless you're doing a driveway or something, that's the only time that it ever really plays. But after 24 hours, you can walk on it. It'll withstand several hundred pounds worth of, spread out force on your shoe. Don't walk on it in spikes. That kind of thing, right? If you got your golf shoes on, might not be a good idea to go walking on your freshly poured concrete. But other than that, that's what it takes. Did that answer your question? Is that the
what my question? Yeah, it does. But more specifically, is if somebody wants to set a post and they're using quick drying or quick setting concrete, how long would it be before that post is set? Would it be a couple?
Check the bag, but it's usually about 2 hours.
2 hours?
2 hours before it becomes kind of unworkable, meaning you're not going to move it much,
Okay, so that's a good thing because, at that point, folks, then you're, the kids can, bump that thing without knocking it over and having it dry, where it's not perfectly 90 degrees vertical. So
Right. Yeah. So and again, read the instructions. You can do that fast setting concrete dry as well. I just don't understand the purpose why you would if you're going to do save the money because it's a little bit more expensive. But if you're going to do it wet, I totally understand that. Meaning you're going to actually pour wet concrete in there, which is fine. So I guess we didn't talk about mixing it either. So like, how do you know when your concrete's properly mixed, right? So if you're mixing it, you're using your shovel and you're turning it. Concrete, you can add water. You can add too much water. John, did you know that concrete actually dries underwater?
I did know that.
Yeah. So I don't know if most people know that, but you can pour concrete into a form and it'll actually harden up underwater. But there's a term called slump, and we're not going to get into it, but it has to do with how much water's in it and how much it slumps in the middle when you do it. And they do that mostly for working reasons. So if you're buying ready mix, they want to know basically how much time they have to actually work with it to get it smooth over the top. And anyway, you want your concrete to be kind of the consistency of depending on what you're doing, but like a heavy mud to kind of a mucky, not mucky, but like mud. You want it. That's why they call it mud. You want it like kind of a mud. As we say, you want to be able to put a groove in it, and it needs to hold the groove, right? If it's too wet, it'll cave in. You might add a little more of the material into it to get it to where it sort of smooths out. If you're pouring like into a ground form where you want it perfectly level, you can make it a little more wet, and you can pour it in, and the water will rise up out of it and dry out. And you'll see the water actually rise to the top. And that's actually when you start to trowel it, is when you see the water coming up, and you can smooth that stuff off. You can get it really, really smooth. And that's all just the water and cement comes up to the top, and the sand does. And then it'll smooth out. One other little tip too is if you're going to be walking on it and you want a little bit of texture in it, you know how you see how it looks kind of like little tiny wavy lines in it, John? That's actually somebody takes, after it starts to dry up a little bit, there's a point where you just take a broom and you just broom it, and you just put a little bit of that brooming into it, and you'll notice, and they tend to move it in kind of an S pattern, and they move the broom across the top of the concrete, and that leaves that little bit of texture in the top, so the concrete is less slippery, I guess I would call it. I don't know how to describe it. Yeah,
and that's generally what you'll see them do on new driveways.
Yes, it's done a lot on driveways, done a lot on pathways, walkways, stairs. I did it on my stairs because I wanted that. I don't want anybody slipping on them, and so I just took the broom and cleaned. And by the way, when you clean concrete off, all it takes is water. So you get your broom out, you broom it out, take your hose, and just hose it off really well. That concrete will come off. Do it out over the lawn. Don't do it anywhere where you don't want concrete. But it'll just go into the ground. It's largely a natural product, so it's not a big deal to do that. So they call that washout. So again, I wanted to touch a little bit on some of the safety tips too. Probably the biggest safety issue that we talk about when we deal with concrete is the weight, because it is heavy, right? It's heavy. So be careful when you're moving it, and if 80-pound bags are too heavy, use 60-pound bags. If 60-pound bags are too heavy, I would suggest you hire a concrete company. Because
or the kid next door.
Or the kid next door. Yeah, or whatever. Find somebody that's good. Concrete itself it's not actually the concrete, but the Portland cement is caustic, so it can irritate or burn you. So you want to be careful touching it. You might want to wear waterproof gloves and boots. It is a kind of messy job, so don't wear your good clothes, right? Don't wear your good clothes. When you're mixing it, it might be a good idea to wear a mask or don't breathe the dust and try to keep it out of your eyes
that's a good
as well.
point.
And then work, obviously, because of the dust, work in a properly ventilated area. Try not to do this inside. It's generally best done outside. If you need to move concrete inside, that's when you use a wheelbarrow. There's lots of pours that you can do inside. I don't know about in a house, but if you're going in your garage, if you're fixing an area in your garage, something, mix that stuff outside. Mix it outside in a wheelbarrow and carry it in, then pour it in. Don't mix it inside. Concrete dust is like drywall dust. It gets everywhere. I mean, everywhere. So just, be aware of that stuff. And then again, I do want to stress, it's heavy. It's heavy. And you're actually taking something that's heavy and then you're adding water, which makes it even heavier. So there you go. What else you got, John? Anything? Any questions, concerns?
No, I mean, you're the concrete guy. I don't, I've used it plenty in my life, but I just never, I never got into a lot of use, different uses of it. I set a lot of, either posts or mailboxes, small projects. And I will tell you, the kind of the net of it is that, I've always used just a general purpose concrete. I think I mixed it up well. Like you said, make sure that it's properly mixed. Put it down. I smoothed it out, and it's not rocket science, and it's fairly, it's easy to work with, and it provides a tremendous result.
Yeah, and it's really versatile. There's really a lot of things you can do with it. I one time I bought one of those little forms, at Home Depot and made a walkway out of it that looked just like stone. It worked great. I mean, it was really, really easy.
See, folks, that's another great use for this stuff is those little forms, and you can make a walkway and it looks like they're pavers.
Yeah, it looks like pavers, and it was simple, and it was it was fairly inexpensive. I mean, what's concrete running right now, John?
It's probably about $5 or $6 a bag.
Yeah,
general just general use concrete.
Yeah, it's not terrible. I think you're talking the 80-pound bag, and I think I'm talking a 60-pound bag. Literally, there is a price difference between the two bags. One covers more area, obviously, than the other one. But yeah, it's not terribly expensive, and it is incredibly strong, and it gives you a lot of versatility. It's just concrete's a great product. If you haven't tried it, if you're feeling up to a little exercise, give it a go. It's kind of pretty cool. I enjoyed it, and. So John, when they abducted me on the spaceship the other day, I did notice they had concrete countertops in there, and I didn't know. Didn't you take one apart? Didn't you?
No, but I think the little guy in there wrote his name in it though.
Yeah, wasn't it Ailey?
Ailey
N? Yeah, that was it.
That was it. That was the initials that were in the concrete.
There you go. Folks, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please send us an email, questions@handymanprosradioshow.com. Go to our website. You can leave us a voice message. You can join our Facebook group. That's @Handyman Pros, or follow us on Twitter @HandymanRadio. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've enjoyed this podcast and have derived some value from it, here's 4 things you can do. 1, tell your friends about this podcast. 2, hit subscribe on your podcast player. While you're there, leave us a review. 3, subscribe to our newsletter by going to handymanprosradioshow.com and click on the subscribe button. We'll inform you of upcoming events, shows, and give you actionable tips for maintaining your home and property. And 4, send us an email with your questions to questions@handymanprosradioshow.com. That's handymanprosradioshow.com. That's our show for this week. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week on the Handyman Pros Radio Show.